honestly, I was scared, but I recognized that I needed to just do this.
Hi, this is Patrick.
And this is Laura.
And you're listening to This is Cancer.
Brought to you by Siteman Cancer Center at Barnes Jewish Hospital and Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis. National leaders in cancer. Today, Patrick, we are talking about something that is really crucial in helping when it comes to prevention, and that is our genetic history.
Yeah, it's very important. I'm beginning to learn both through the podcast and then just in my personal life how impactful it can be to know your genetic markers and likelihood of certain cancers.
Absolutely. I actually just yesterday, I was with a high-risk breast cancer specialist who we'll be talking with later today about my own personal history with cancer and my efforts to try and do my best when it comes to prevention. But today, we want to welcome Danielle, who has recently gone through a diagnosis thanks to someone bringing to your attention the importance of your family history. So welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Danielle, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to your recent diagnosis.
Well, I can take you back to 2017, having my regular checkup with my GYN and telling her about my history. And she suggested that I go see an oncologist. And, I'm thinking,
what was your history? Tell us.
So I have 4 maternal aunts that were diagnosed with breast cancer. 2 have passed away. 2 are still alive and well. So honestly, when she first said it, I was thinking, well, I don't have cancer,
I didn't come here for this.
Exactly. I'm thinking, okay, yeah, whatever. But so I honestly ignored her the first time. And so 2018, I come back. And so she asked me again, like, Danielle, you really need to go see about this. And at that point, I did.
So she had given you in 2017 a doctor to go to.
And I was not compliant.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And so she knew that you didn't go to that.
Mm-hmm. I don't know how she knew. I mean, of course. I mean, she probably
they usually
checked.
have records.
But I didn't think she would follow up that closely. Like how many patients does she have, right?
Well, that's good on her part.
But I'm very grateful that she did, right? And so she's like, really, Danielle? And honestly, I was scared. It took me like this experience to realize, like, why didn't I just do the referral? It was nothing wrong at the time, but
what were you scared of?
I was scared of knowing, scared of someone finding it out. I don't know, which is weird because you want the early detection, but I don't know. Somehow it felt like if I go to an oncologist, I'm admitting that.
Then it's real.
Yeah, that I could have it or I do. I don't know. It was something that was a block. And so I just blew it off until this 2018 when I came back, and she's looking at me like, this is really important. And at that point, I went on and called the doctor that she recommended, and, things started from there. What do
you think changed between the first time and the second time? Just the physician's attitude made it clear that it was like, hey, I'm not kidding here. Yes, I've been seeing her for a long time, and we joke because she's sort of maternal. So she gives you the look, and she has those inflections in her voice. Danielle. Like when you're in trouble, like with your mom. And when she came to me like that, like, this is, and I got it. It was like, okay, Mom, I won't ever do that again. It was that kind of feeling. So nothing in my fear had changed. I was still a little nervous, but I recognized that I needed to just do this. Yeah.
For those of you listening, what's really crazy is the genetic testing part is not that hard.
Right.
It's not painful. It's not like they put you in some big machine and shoot lasers at you. They either take a swab or blood, like a saliva swab. It's literally not a big deal.
Yeah.
Right?
It was all in my mind. Yes.
So tell me what you did that first day that you went in.
So when I finally met with the doctor, she has all these questions. And so she had to set the stage for, okay, do you meet the high risk qualifications based on, whatever the medical people say. So she was asking me lots of questions, and, we kind of went through that series, and she determined, yes, you are high risk. And so then she referred me for genetic testing.
Do you remember why you were high risk? Do you remember what the doctor said about what qualified you as being high risk?
Definitely, not all the specifics, but definitely my family history. African American, that played a role. I think those are the only 2 things I remember.
So the process of opting in for genetic testing basically began with a questionnaire.
Yeah.
It's a conversation, and then they say, based on your answers, yes, you should get tested.
Yes, yes. And then I had an interview with the actual genetic testing people. They asked lots of questions. And then eventually I actually went and gave the blood sample, which was quick and painless.
What significance does being African American have on breast cancer? It's just is it just more prevalent?
Yes, it is. Yeah, statistics, it is, which I honestly didn't know.
I didn't know that.
I did know that.
Yeah, it is.
I know being pasty white, I can probably get melanoma a little bit easier than some folks.
I'm not sure what the scientific reason is for that.
I'm not sure either.
Yeah, and there are higher risks in certain other ethnicities and certain other cancers as well. And people don't talk about this. I mean, you are an African-American woman in your late 40s with 4 aunts, and I'm fine. And when the doctor says that to you, you're like, it's good.
So and she's African-American too.
Yeah.
You know, she has a platform and she uses it to say, hey, we need to do better for ourselves. And we need to be compliant, find out what you need to find out, and take care of yourself. So that's part of what she does.
And that, I just got the chills when you said that about just like, this matters. And because this episode is so important because anybody listening, it applies to. It applies to having that conversation, bringing it up with your doctor. You fill out those family history things like it doesn't matter, and this is why it matters. And it's going to get even more relevant as we go throughout this episode. But please, 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 if you're listening to this, have some conversations and don't be scared because the genetic testing could literally save your life. So this is so ironic. So you listened to the doctor in 2018. So then you go and they're like, yes, you're high risk. So what was their plan for you to help you when it came to prevention?
So her approach was, you know, after the genetic testing, she said I needed to do enhanced screening. So, you know, I always got a mammogram once a year. So what she wanted to do was do a mammogram, then 6 months later, MRI, mammogram, you know, so that whole cycle.
So every 6 months you're being looked at.
And so I started that in 2018, and I've been doing that ever since.
And so a few years into this, tell us what happened.
Yeah, so 2018, that was fine. Then 2019, with the MRI, they saw like my lymph nodes seemed weird or something.
Maybe a little swollen or something like that.
And so they wanted to biopsy them. So I'm thinking, what in the world? So that was stressful.
Yep.
So they did it on, I think it was like the left side. And, you know, you're like, okay, and everything came back good. And then 2020, I go for my MRI, and then they said the right side is larger than it was the year before. So they did another biopsy. You know, again, my lymph node's like under my arm. And I'm thinking, okay, this is for the birds, as my grandmother used to say, you know, but I'm still being compliant, right? I'm doing what they're saying. So they do the biopsy, everything comes back, fine, okay, fine. So now it's 2021. I go for my MRI again, and this time they flagged and they saw something, and that's when they recommended an ultrasound. And what was really amazing was when she was doing the ultrasound, she was conflicted. Like, well, it kind of looks, she was like making this noise, and I'm laying there thinking, no biopsy, no biopsy. That's what my inner chatter is saying. And she was like, I'm going to biopsy. And I was like, no, this is me, right? Because I've had 2 biopsies.
Right.
Like, you know, not on my breast, but, you know, it's enough, right? And so...
Yeah, they're not fun.
They are not, you know, but I was concerned at that point because I'm like, okay, I've had both, you know, underarms, but now this is like actually in the breast. So she ordered the biopsy. I did that in January 2022. And, you know, I was waiting for the results. You know, you've had 2 biopsies. You kind of know how my chart works. You know, you're like stalking and looking and waiting for results. And so I was really suspicious. So I finally called and I was like, you know, what's going on? And so she was like, oh, the doctor didn't call you? No. And she's like, well, do you want me to tell you? I was like, well, yeah. And she told me, and I remember her saying, you know, how do you feel? And I said, well, you know, I have mixed emotions. I said, but I'm grateful. I said, I'm grateful for my gynecologist. I'm grateful for, and I just went through the list. And that was my posture at that point. Like, nope, I'm just grateful that the radiologist, because I have dense breasts, that she didn't just say, oh, it's fine, you know, that she flagged it, that the radiologist doing the ultrasound, that she didn't listen to my inner chatter saying no biopsy, you know, that she
did her job.
She did her
even
job.
Though she knew that Danielle really does not want a third one of these.
Exactly, yes. But she didn't, you know, she did what she was supposed to do. And so that got the ball rolling. And the thing that I love is the nurse said, well, do you have a surgeon? And I'm like, no, I don't kind of like have a breast surgeon like on speed dial,
Right.
you know? And she's like, no problem. She said, I'll call the one who did my breast surgery 20 years ago.
Wow.
And, that was like reassuring. And she set up the appointment and that got the ball rolling.
Especially to hear her say 20
years ago. Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
So that inserted a little bit of hope in that moment that you weren't even really looking for or expecting.
That's the perfect perspective to have on that. That attitude. That's the right attitude to have, because that's, without question, some of the worst news that you could ever get in your life, right? That you have cancer. But think about the alternative.
That's exactly what I said.
Because as bad as 3 biopsies are, having undiagnosed breast cancer a year or 2 down the line is undoubtedly going to be way worse.
Absolutely.
What did Dr. Cyr say to you when they found the lump?
Yeah, so again, she was thinking, I think everyone was like, okay, here she kind of goes again, what is this? Nobody really thought it was anything. When she got the results and, we talked, she said, I don't know when you would have ever felt this because it was so small.
Yeah.
Probably not until it was
too late.
A big problem.
A big problem, yeah. And so that was reassuring, so you feel like if it has to happen, this is like the best case scenario of something that nobody wants to deal with. Yeah.
So we should mention for the listeners that are wondering, what was your treatment? Because since you had another MRI, you did not have a double mastectomy.
Yes. So when I met with the surgeon, she said, look, it's up to you, but we could remove it and, you could do radiation and you should be fine. I was really open to whatever she really recommended. And so I went that route. Yeah. So I had surgery February 2022. Then I had radiation. I think I started sometime in March and I finished in April.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this will be a conversation for a whole other podcast, but double mastectomies are no joke. And it is a lot to consider. And for every woman, it is such a personal decision. And there are so many people that successfully have a lumpectomy or go that route and continue to be cancer-free. It's different for every single person. And
it is. And I've met both. I've actually I was at a women's event where I was speaking because I'm a therapist. It's one of my careers. But I, went to speak to these ladies and they were like, yeah, we heard what you said about your diagnosis, which I still don't quite know how that came out my mouth in this presentation, but that's another story. But it came out my mouth somehow in the context of what I was saying. And they said, well, we're survivors. And she was like, I'm 20 and she's like 22. And one had a double mastectomy and one had a lumpectomy. And they were like friends. And so that was another place of encouragement to see these ladies who have been alive 20 plus years. They went 2 different routes. Like you said, it's very personal. And here they are, hanging out at this women's event, having a good time.
Okay, ladies, I know you've heard this before, that if you are 40 and older, you need to be getting your yearly mammogram. And so this is my reminder to all of you that if you haven't done it yet this year, please go do it, especially if you have a family history of breast cancer. One of the great things that Siteman offers to people in the greater St. Louis area is its mobile mammography van, and it allows them to get 3D imaging, and it only takes like 20 minutes. And so you can go to the link in our episode description to find out where the mammography van is headed in the next few months. And if you don't live in the St. Louis area, that should not stop you from getting a mammogram. Call your doctor or go online and find your nearest screening location. Come on, ladies, you got to get it done. A mammogram can save your life. And it's important to mention that when you had your genetic testing, you did not carry the BRCA gene.
I did not.
And so that does not mean that if you don't have the BRCA gene, that you're in the clear. You're a perfect example of that, right?
Yep.
So, and there may not even still be an exact gene mutation correlation between you and your aunts. But had you not had the genetic testing, and had you not mentioned that, that's the path that got you to that screening. And that itself is awesome.
It is.
Did you give your gynecologist a gift basket when you got diagnosed? And say,
my goodness.
Did you say, you were right?
Yeah, I mean, I did go see her. I saw her before I had surgery, and she was just shocked. She was like, oh, my goodness. But, I thanked her, and I've seen her since then, I thanked her for, giving me the mama mean mug because I totally ignored her the year before. So, yeah, I appreciate her.
I would be the least humble physician ever if I had that. I'd be like, in your face, I saved your life. I saved your life. You're welcome.
Except she's more like a mom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's honey,
more maternal.
I'm glad you finally listened to me.
Yes.
I'm really glad
Like,
everything is fine. But she's strutted out of the office that day.
Yeah.
That's
How's
right.
that life I saved?
I know, right?
Yeah.
What conversations have you had with your family and with friends since you've gone through this?
Yeah, so it's very complicated because you want to tell people that you love because, you want them to know and their support, but you don't because you can't really manage their feelings and, and their emotions. So, telling people that was an ordeal, but what I've really tried to do is just encourage people to, make sure you get your mammogram. So when I agreed to do the campaign with Siteman, it's in print, it's on Facebook, it's everywhere. And people say to me, I'll get a mammogram. Thank you for sharing your story. So now I'm just really encouraging people. And I have a younger sister, and I've talked to her heavily about it because I do want her to, be very proactive.
And what is the name of the campaign that you're working on with Siteman right now?
For the lives you touch.
Okay. And it's really encouraging people to
get screened now.
Yeah.
And it's a campaign that, I've seen in all kinds of places. And people, they respond to it. I had one person text me and I bawled, just crying. It was so touching. She said, because of you, she said, I will get a mammogram just because of you. And I'm thinking, okay,
That's amazing.
It was so heartwarming. I don't know why, and you don't know why things happen. But, I just believe that God wants to use every part of my life, even the bad parts. If it can help another person to say, let me do that. Let me check myself out. Let me, advocate for yourself even.
Yeah.
Because I know that's a problem too.
What about your little sister? What has she decided to do?
My younger sister, she is not 40 yet. So I'm just giving her the tools to ask the questions because they may not bring it up. Everybody doesn't have my wonderful gynecologist,
And she might be able to get screened earlier, get a mammogram earlier. And so here's what's so interesting to me is that when you said about your sister, that, okay, so you find this out, you go get all the genetic testing. Your sister still hasn't had a mammogram. Okay?
Right, yeah.
And she's but I would be willing to bet with my medical background of 0, and Dr. Cyr could tell us this later, if she's eligible, she's probably eligible. My sister gets breast cancer in 2019. We know that my grandmother had both of her breasts removed in her 20s, but back in those days, they were more prone to just do double mastectomies. So then Stacy, my sister, gets breast cancer, before the age of 50, which we have now learned is key to knowing you're at higher risk if you have someone in your family, especially your sister, that was diagnosed before 50 or your mom. And I don't think, maybe I should let someone know that my sister had this. And when I got my mammogram on January 3rd this year, the tech goes, you have really dense breasts. And she goes, what's your family history of breast cancer? I'm like, my sister had it when she was in 2019. How old was she? 45. She goes, you're high risk.
Wow.
You need to get screened and talk to someone. Immediately she said that. And I was like, really? My dumb ASS. Really? I've been told I've had dense breasts for 10 years. My sister has cancer. And I never once think, nor did I even know or ask my sister, hey, why did you get that MRI in 2019? I could not feel any more stupid right now as these things are coming out of my mouth.
I think it all kind of stems from what Danielle was saying earlier about how in 2018 it was her gyno that was like, you should go get checked out for this, and you felt this fear, and you don't want that to be an option. So I think you don't do what you're supposed to do, because if you find out that it's there, then you have to deal with it.
Right.
The way to handle that is not by burying your head in the sand, but rather to take control of what you can control and to have preventative measures with your diet, to get genetic screening if it runs in your family. If you don't have a sister that had breast cancer or 4 aunts that had breast cancer, what if you're an only child and you don't know anything about your family history? You still need to get screened. You can go to getscreenednow.com. It'll tell you anywhere that you can go get screened. It doesn't have to be Siteman. I mean, all Siteman really cares about is that people are getting screened.
Yes.
That people are doing what they can do to be healthy because, I mean, at the end of the day, no one wants to be wrestling with this monster.
Right.
So,
and I tell people, I've been asked, well, what do you want to tell people? Not knowing doesn't change the facts.
yeah.
So you can not know, but it doesn't mean it's not there.
Right.
So the whole burying your head in the sand thing is really pointless.
The regret
right?
you'll feel.
Yeah.
The way you'll be kicking yourself down the road from you will.
Yeah.
I used to play this game with myself. I would torture myself going, what if I could just go back 1 year in time, knowing what I know now, and I would change the path of everything. You don't get to do that.
Right.
But ignoring it only makes it worse.
Yes.
And I do know people who've done that. And the treatment is the best the earlier is detected, whatever type of disease it is. The earlier the better. So not knowing doesn't negate what's there. And
Plus, as a therapist, I mean, don't you probably deal with this on so many levels, right? My gosh. How many other careers do you have, by the way? You said one of my careers.
Yeah, so my day career, I work at a publishing company. I've been there. This is my 23rd year.
Oh, nice.
I'm a content development manager there. And I went back and got my master's in counseling, like in my 30s. And then I finished my PhD in 2019.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I'm done with school forever.
Smart people can ignore their doctors too.
Yes. Oh, yeah. It doesn't matter how many degrees you have, what you think you know. You need to listen and comply. And in the cases where they're not coming to you, I was blessed to have people who knocked on the door like, hello, Danielle. But, what I say to people is to advocate. You have to advocate for yourself because medical professionals are great, but they don't know everything about us. And so some things we have to bring to them and work with them to get to where we need to be.
Yeah,
exactly.
People need to get to the point where when their cousin or their uncle or their sister have any kind, or their grandparent have any kind of brush with cancer, that is something that needs to click in your brain. To go, I need to keep an eye on that or get an eye on that.
Yes.
And memorize it so then when you do answer that questionnaire at your doctor's offices, it will, if it doesn't strike a chord with you, it will with them, because they're trained to ask those questions.
Yes, yes.
And to your point earlier, Patrick, about some people being scared, I was just purely ignorant of just the fact that I could be qualified as a high-risk person to get more screening. It was pure ignorance. It wasn't, I'm a pretty, I said I didn't go to the gynecologist for 3 years, but normally I'm a pretty, every 6 months dentist, wanting to see your physical, I get my mammogram. I was like, I am doing everything I can. I'm getting my mammogram once a year. I always post a picture and say, get your tatas checked, ladies. Not of my breasts, but of me and my gown.
Right.
I don't take a picture of me getting smashed in the machine.
Yeah.
But I didn't think.
So inappropriate.
Clarification.
The smash is real, ladies, but it's worth it.
It is.
But I thought I was doing everything that I could do. And now I feel so much more empowered. But I hope that anything that comes out of today's episode is, if you don't know your family history and you guys don't talk about it often in your family, start asking questions. If you don't feel comfortable asking questions, find someone in your family that is comfortable asking questions about what your family history is.
You have to take care of yourself.
If you're not putting your health first, you don't know what could happen. So it's really advocating for yourself starts with, if you don't have a general practitioner, get one.
Yes.
If you are not getting, if you're not going to the gynecologist once you're sexually active or you're over 18, get one. If you're not getting a mammogram at 40, get one.
That's I thought we were all three going to do it.
I know. Let's do it.
Damn it, you dropped out.
When do you?
1, 2, 3.
Get one.
Okay.
Nice.
The title of this episode is Get One. That's right.
Yeah.
And that's how we're going to end it today. Danielle, I am so grateful that you listened in 2018. I'm glad you're here telling your story and sharing it with others because I think it could save a bunch of lives.
Yeah, I hope so.
Thank you, Danielle.
Thank you.
Anytime I've spoken to an oncologist or physician, they preach the importance of prevention and early detection.
But there's some of us that don't even know where to start when it comes to prevention and what they're even at risk of getting.
And that's why Siteman came out with this amazing tool called yourdiseaserisk.com.
Yeah, it lists 12 of the main cancers and 6 other important chronic diseases. And you can click on each one of the cancers and it gives you a questionnaire to find out if you're at risk for that particular cancer. It's really a great tool just to get conversations started on what you can do when it comes to prevention.
So if you'd like to know more, go to yourdiseaserisk.com or click on the link in our episode description.
So now we want to welcome to the show Dr. Amy Cyr. Amy, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
As Danielle mentioned earlier, you were able to help get her some preventative tests that led to finding breast cancer with her. I think she said she went in her third year, they found the breast cancer. Mm-hmm. And earlier this year, I went to get a mammogram, my yearly. I'm 46 years old. The lady that did my tests asked me if I realized that I had dense breasts. I have heard that many times before, and then asked me about my family history. My sister was diagnosed at 45 with breast cancer, and she asked me if I was aware that I was a candidate for genetic counseling. And the first thing I want to mention about that is, although my sister had breast cancer, and although I knew I had dense breasts, I was not aware that I was a candidate for genetic counseling. Does that surprise you to hear that?
It does not at all. I think we really want to try to get the word out so that women know that they're candidates for genetic testing and for increased screening. But unfortunately, a lot of women don't. And a lot of times women are in this situation like your sister, where they're going through treatment and genetic testing might be, discussed with her, but that information doesn't trickle down to other family members.
And that's exactly what happened. And what did get to me was she tested negative for the BRCA gene. And we all, as women, many of us have heard about the BRCA gene, and that if you have tested positive for someone in your family, that's when you need to go. But because she tested negative, then I was like, oh, okay, then I don't need to go. But she was diagnosed with breast cancer before the age of 50, which is a huge thing, correct?
Correct. It's a big red flag.
And the dense breast, for those of you that we've talked about this before with Danielle, that means it's harder to find possible irregularities in your breast with a regular mammogram and even sometimes with a 3D mammogram. Is that correct?
That's correct. You actually get a double whammy with having dense breasts because exactly what you said, abnormalities can hide. The 3D mammograms are better than the standard mammograms that we used to do. And in the St. Louis area, most mammograms are by default 3-dimension. But in addition to still, masking abnormalities on mammography, dense breasts are its own risk factor for breast cancer. So women who have dense breasts have a higher risk than a comparable woman without dense breasts.
And I'm sorry, Dr. Cyr, I'm always so bad at this about making sure that you mention your name and title at Siteman Cancer Center.
My name is Amy Cyr, and I'm an assistant professor of medicine in the Department of Medical Oncology.
Okay, and you do specialize in genetic testing, is that correct?
I do. I am actually a breast surgeon by training, and as breast surgeons, we see a lot of women who are high risk, and we do a lot of our own genetic testing. And a few years, I went to part-time practice, and so this is all I do now.
Okay. And so going back to what you said about dense breasts, I didn't realize that. I thought dense breasts just meant that it's harder to detect, but they actually also make you at a higher risk of getting breast cancer?
Yes. Independent of any other factors, it's just something about the tissue makes, women with dense breasts, have a higher breast cancer risk.
Okay. So when I came back and talked after I had my mammogram, I talked to some of the members who work behind the scenes at Siteman on this podcast with us. And Rachel said, I'm going to see if you can get referred to someone because she's great. And I think it'd be a great help to you. I want to help you out as much as I can, which was amazing. And by, a month or so later, I had an appointment with you. And my husband came with me because I've talked enough on this podcast about having someone in a second set of ears.
It is helpful.
And he's like, what do you mean you want me to go with you? Like, what's wrong? I'm like, nothing. I just want you to be here to listen. And he actually came up with some good questions,
I told you if Mike ever had to, he would step up.
You did. Yeah, I know. And so he came, and it was interesting because I mentioned this before that I felt weird walking into a cancer center and I didn't have cancer.
A lot of people say that. They feel like they're in somehow the wrong place, or it just really jacks up their nerves to walk into a cancer center.
Yeah.
Every single time that I go in, they have to take my blood pressure and heart rate after the appointment or, not when I first get there because everything is jacked. My heart rate is up, my blood pressure's up, and I can just see it in the nurse's face every time. They're kind of like, oh, all right.
Yeah.
Did you get chased by a bear into the building?
No, I just remember looking around and going, I wonder if people here think that I have cancer. I wonder what they're going through right now. You just kind of start this whole empathy thought process in your head as you're looking around. And what's also I took note is that everyone seemed okay. you could tell that there was a really great process in which the check-in was, and everyone seemed like they were being taken care of. And it wasn't this like what I have pictured before of just a very sad look of people when I walked. And this is just my Patrick's making a really weird face.
I'm trying to imagine what the hell you were thinking of.
I imagined that
shouting at us on a bullhorn, being like, get to the left. They're just smacking us with sticks. And
I just pictured a lot of sad people waiting for like a treatment, and that wasn't what I saw. I mean, I'm just talking.
You're thinking of like a movie.
That's exactly what I was thinking of, and it just was people going into the doctor and doing what they had to do. And I don't know what anybody's backgrounds were, but I'm just saying how I felt walking in and what my perception was. I could sound like a total idiot on this podcast, and I'm willing to own it.
No. I mean, walking into the place where people find out that they have cancer, where they get treated for cancer, where they have surgeries for cancer, the reality of that is something you can't deny when you walk through the threshold of it. But the fortunate aspect of it, the reality of it is that a lot of those people and a lot of those cases are resolved successfully. So it should be as much hopeful as it is scary, but realistically, it is a little bit of both.
Yeah. Well, I came out smiling and feeling very well prepared. So I'd love to talk with you, Dr. Cyr, about our conversation and what we came to decide about my plans as far as prevention. I took the test that kind of showed sort of what my number was. Can you explain what that number, I don't even know what the number is called.
Yeah, there are various calculators that we use, and we can input information about women and information about their family history to try to calculate, someone's remaining lifetime breast cancer risk. And in general, average lifetime breast cancer risk for a Caucasian woman is 12 to 13%. It's a little lower for Black women and a little lower than that for women of other races. But a woman who has a calculated lifetime breast cancer risk of at least 20% is considered high risk and is eligible for high risk screening, which typically means incorporation of breast MRI in addition to mammograms. So typically when I see someone who has a family history of cancer like you, or someone who has dense breasts, or maybe they've had an abnormal but not a cancerous biopsy, we put all of that into calculators that help kind of guide us and justify to insurance companies what sort of screening you're eligible for.
And I think my number was like 42% or something, 40 to 42% chance of getting breast cancer in my lifetime. And then we discussed what options would be, which what we decided on was an ultrasound or a mammogram, and you'd be giving me a breast exam once a year at the mammogram and breast exam, and then 6 months later come in for an MRI, which is a closer look. And then you explained to me why some people don't always want to do that MRI. And can you give me what some people would say the cons are to that?
Sure. Well, one of the reasons we like MRI for high-risk women is it's really good at catching things, including all sorts of benign things. So there's a pretty high rate of getting called back from an MRI, especially someone's first MRI, and having to do some other testing, whether it's going straight to a needle biopsy or, a 6-month follow-up MRI or an ultrasound. But when you're already a high-risk woman and you're doing high-risk screening, and I talk to you after your first MRI and tell you need a biopsy right off the bat, it obviously means a lot of anxiety. So I like to warn people about that ahead of time. And the other big issue with MRI is potential out-of-pocket cost, which unfortunately makes it just not an option for a lot of women. And even though we use that risk calculation to justify to insurance companies that say, an individual is eligible for breast MRI, that her risk is high enough, a lot of times insurance will consider it diagnostic and not preventive care, which means copays and deductibles apply. So basically, if someone is having yearly breast MRIs, they will meet their deductible every year, even if their deductible is $5,000. So that's, again, an important thing to be prepared for ahead of time. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of compound those two. So if you get called back from an MRI and need more tests, that's more diagnostic imaging, more potential out-of-pocket cost.
Right. And so that you have to weigh that if that's something that you really want, if you can afford, number one, and if your nerves and anxiety, how you are mentally about handling these things, if you can handle that, or 2 or 3 years in a row of biopsies that end up being negative. Some women either get tired of that and say, I don't want to do this anymore, or they go the route of double mastectomy.
Yeah, it's a little, in terms of deciding who's eligible for a double mastectomy, it depends a little who you ask in terms of which patients are eligible for that. Some people feel that a woman's remaining lifetime breast cancer risk should be at least 50%. in order to qualify for such a big move.
Yeah.
I think most of my colleagues feel that if you're high enough risk for high risk screening, so again, we're at that 20% number, you should be eligible for a double mastectomy. And again, for a lot of women, it's just testing fatigue and potential out-of-pocket cost. And over the years, all of that anxiety, all of that testing, even all the false negatives, that all adds up. And some women are very happy to do that indefinitely, and some women never have an abnormal MRI. But for a lot of women, they get to a point where they're just kind of done.
Do some people try to strike a balance between like 6 months and nothing? Like if they're getting testing fatigue, do they ever...
Could they do like an every other year MRI?
So we don't typically recommend that, or I should say the guidelines really still recommend yearly MRI, yearly mammogram. But for practical reasons, whether it's anxiety or out-of-pocket costs, there are women who will do an MRI every couple of years. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, out-of-pocket cost is a huge reason that keeps otherwise eligible women from doing breast MRI.
And one of the things that I wanted to bring up that was also helpful that I was able to bring to the appointment because I was told to was I had my sister's genetic testing results. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to even put more information towards my health history. And we also did a very detailed discussion about both grandparents, what I knew, aunts and uncles on both sides, and siblings about those, any family history. And we're not talking just about breast cancer.
Correct. Yeah. A lot of the breast cancer genes have other non-breast cancer risks that go along with them. And a lot of times people focus on breast and ovarian cancer, and the BRCA genes increase the risk of both of those type of cancers. But there are a lot of other genes that increase the risk of just ovarian cancer or maybe ovarian and other cancers, and ditto with breast cancer. So now that we know about all these different genes, I love it when someone like you brings in a copy of a family member's genetic test report, because that way I can say, okay, for sure, your sister got tested for all of these genes. Did this cover, genes that might have explained some of the other cancer risk in the family?
Yeah. But what I also thought was super interesting was my parents have not, either one of them had genetic testing, but you said there's a chance that your parents passed one set of genes onto your sister, but then there's other genes that got passed on to you. So if your mom wanted to do genetic testing, that would really help tell your genetic story too. Or my dad as well. And we had that conversation, which I then went back to my mom, and she's going to get the genetic testing done, which will really help even tell my story better, because you'll identify genes in her that if they didn't get passed to my sister, we might start looking for when it comes to me.
Yeah. And we start to kind of get into the weeds a little bit when family histories get complicated. But bottom line is, yeah, you can have more than one cancer gene in a family. Sometimes you can have more than one cancer gene in a person. So again, having those results is really helpful to know, was the appropriate and what we would currently consider adequate testing done. But yeah, just because one person in the family, like your sister, has negative genetic testing, if there's otherwise cancer risk, that you might have inherited from either parent, doesn't necessarily mean you're off the hook. But there are families where there's a BRCA1 gene on one side of the family and a BRCA2 gene on the other, or some other cancer gene.
We brag a lot on the Siteman Cancer Center on this podcast because it's easy to. They're literally top 10 in the nation. They've got the expertise of more than 450 Washington University research scientists and physicians who provide care for nearly 50,000 people a year. That's a lot of people in a year. They've got multidisciplinary teams with specialists in all types of cancers and areas of treatment. And if you are looking for a cancer specialist at Siteman Cancer Center, all you've got to do is go to siteman.wustl.edu or just click on the link in our episode description.
One of the things that I think is incredibly important to mention is we talked about getting a full line of more detailed genetic testing. And one of the first things you said to me was, it's a great tool and we can learn a lot, but there's a couple things I want you to know. That if you are planning to get a life insurance policy or long-term care insurance, there are things that might come up on that genetic testing profile that might keep you from being able to get coverage because it flags a high risk for pancreatic or kidney or any other cancer that then would make the health insurance company say, well, they've got a high risk of getting this, so we're not going to cover them. So if you still have a policy you want to change when it comes to life insurance or you're planning on getting long-term care insurance, I would hold off. And what's on our thing this year to get a long-term care insurance plan.
So genetic information can be used as a pre-existing condition. Health insurance is protected. So there's actually a federal law in place that health insurance cannot use genetic information as a pre-existing condition. But pretty much any other insurance can. And so, yeah, it's life insurance, long-term care, and disability insurance. And most of the time, if someone has a group policy through an employer, that's fine. And a lot of people have coverage already in place, and that should be fine. But I usually warn people, if you're ever in the position where you're filling out a health questionnaire or doing a physical or blood work to change or get new insurance, that's when an insurance company could ask you if you've had genetic testing, and you have to disclose if you have and those results. And they could use that to deny you coverage or charge you more.
So when you look at genetic counseling as big picture, I think there's probably two schools of thought, right? Like, I'd like to have as much information as possible so I know what I could do to when it comes to prevention. And maybe others that might think, I don't want to know all this stuff. It's just going to make me constantly scared and worried. And I would imagine that that's up to each individual person on what's going to make them feel the most sane to go through their life, correct?
Yes. And I have a biased patient population because most women who come to see me want that information. But yeah, there are quite a few people who, once they kind of hear about all the potential, outcomes of genetic testing or what you might do with that information, they opt out. And again, a lot of it has to do with insurance concerns, insurability concerns, but anxiety as well. And sometimes I see people who, say someone like you who has a family member with breast cancer, and your sister diagnosed at age 45 was eligible for genetic testing. In some families, your sister, the person who is eligible for genetic testing who's actually had cancer, refuses genetic testing. We kind of do the best we can with the family history information available.
One question I have is for the general public that might not be, concerned about breast cancer and their family history or have a reason to, is everyone a candidate for genetic counseling?
Everybody is a candidate for genetic counseling, and technically everybody is a candidate for genetic testing. The kicker is, will insurance cover it? So there are certain criteria that insurance companies use to decide whether or not they pay for genetic testing. So for instance, breast cancer under age 50 is an automatic indication. Breast cancer plus Ashkenazi Jewish heritage is another automatic indication. So there are all of these things insurance companies look at. But genetic testing in general has gotten so inexpensive that most of the labs have a cash price. So people who have no family history and they just feel like genetic testing can technically, give a credit card number and get genetic testing for about $250. Again, I don't necessarily advise that, but it is an option for people who don't meet those insurance company criteria.
And can they take that information and give it to their doctor, or who do they take that information to when they get it?
Typically, a physician has to order the genetic testing.
Okay.
So there are a few ways that consumers can actually kind of initiate their own genetic testing, but somehow there has to be like a physician or a provider roped in to actually order the test and to receive results. Most of these companies do provide telemedicine genetic counseling, which is certainly better than nothing. But I think, unfortunately, if, people go down that route and then they get this result, even a negative result, and take it to, say, their internist or their primary care provider, that primary care provider may not know how to interpret that or how to counsel.
Right.
So, for instance, just because your genetic test is negative doesn't mean you're off the hook and don't have an increased cancer risk.
Right. Well, you think about people that are adopted. I mean, are they automatically able to get, because how else would they know? How else would they have any family history to help guide them on their journey? Do you have any experience with that with patients that have no family history and come and say, please just help me. I want to know what my options are?
I don't get too many patients in that situation who, for instance, are adopted or don't know family history. Unfortunately, that's kind of the nature of the beast when you're making all of these decisions based on family history. A lot of family histories are incomplete and inaccurate, and a lot of people come from small families with only children, or they're adopted, something like that.
Hopefully patients don't come to you that frantically and go, can you just help me?
Well, they'd probably have to
help me?
They'd probably have to get a referral to you first. They can't just walk into Siteman and be like,
me.
hey, am I at risk for pancreatic cancer?
That's what I was wondering. Do people just corner you at parties and be like, so what about this?
Not too often. Not too often. Truthfully, it's usually the reverse. So I will hear someone talking about their family history and I will kind of jump in. Well, have they had genetic testing? Because if not, they really should.
Right.
So I'm typically the one who's butting into conversations to bring up genetic testing.
You might want to get that checked out.
That's right.
If you had that,
That's
you
right.
could be in big trouble.
Well, that's what I think is so important about this podcast and something that my sister and I talked about. I couldn't believe that neither one of us dingbats were like, we both knew we had dense breasts because we've been joking with each other about our boobs for so many years about, oh, did they tell you a dense breast at this mammogram? It's like something we just have always joked about. But I was like, dude, you got diagnosed in 2018. It's 2023. And this is the first time someone at a mammogram said, do you have a family history because your breasts are really dense? And I'm like, how is that? You had breast cancer. How is this that your doctor didn't say to you, do you have a sibling? Like, how do we help people understand whether it's something they should consider?
I think some of it is education, podcasts like this. And
so we're really good that we're doing this.
It's fantastic. It's fantastic. But I think a lot of it is also on people who are taking care of women like your sister to say, hey, you have a sister. She's going to be higher risk. And I really try to do that, even if I'm, seeing someone who hasn't had cancer. It's just about family history. But, trying to say, have your siblings, have your mom get her own risk assessment or get her own genetic testing. And one thing I love it, like when you brought in your sister's genetic testing, that thrills me. It makes me incredibly happy. But every time I do genetic testing, I try to tell people, you need a copy for yourself. And especially if it shows anything, I tell people, make copies and give it to family members or take a photo of the front page, take a screenshot and text or email it to everybody.
Yeah.
So that way family members have that information because unfortunately, at some point, people who've had the genetic testing or who've had the cancer may pass away, whether that's due to cancer or not. So again, I think it's important that family members get their hands on that information for down the road.
I think it's something that's being talked about more and more, the genetic counseling, but I don't think has near the reach that it could if people knew more about it. And I've just learned so much just about talking with my family. My parents have had some pretty big health issues this year, and we've been talking more about our health, even if that just leads to more screening. I think the biggest takeaway is to first, number one, when you are filling out, when you go to a new doctor, your family history, fill it out correctly. Don't just be like, nope, because you're too lazy to, because maybe that doctor could read it and catch something.
Yes. And some things you may not think are relevant, like you might see a family history of pancreatic cancer and not think that that's any big deal. It's not related to breast cancer, but it is. That's its own indication for genetic testing in a family.
See, there we go. I guess, again, what we're really trying to encourage people to do is to really start proactively talking to their internist or for men, just their internist. They don't go to any other. What do men do, Patrick? Where do you go other than an internist? I go to a female doctor as well. What you got?
What is an internist?
It's a general practitioner.
Why do you say that with such stank on it? I go to a general practitioner. He's a man.
Yeah, but I also go to an OBGYN. What else do men do?
I don't need to go to an OBGYN.
Oh.
Yeah.
Right? What else should I be doing, Dr. Cyr, other than going to a general? I have a cardiologist because I have a history of heart stuff. So I went and got looked at.
Why do men not go to a man doctor, like a man part doctor, when women go to a female part doctor?
I think most internists or most primary care providers, so an internist is basically someone who studied internal medicine instead of family practice. So a focus on adults-related disease, and they're usually primary care providers. They'll usually do the screening that men need. So prostate cancer screening, and there's a whole bunch of nuance to that is over my head, but like lab work or a digital rectal exam, most internists will do that. And so most guys don't need to go to, some other doctor for that.
So again, men continue to have it easier than women.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I just wanted to make that clear on the
I'm
podcast.
feeling really ganged up on here.
And kind of a similar topic, one issue is, we have a lot more transgender, men and women now that we're taking care of, and it's really important. Most transgender folks, I think, are being taken care of by people who are up to date on guidelines, but there are actually very specific guidelines for breast cancer screening for trans men and trans women.
Oh.
So those guidelines do exist with recommendations for who needs mammograms and starting at what time.
Okay. So if someone's listening to this and they've never maybe even heard of genetic counseling or know about it, what is the number one thing you would tell them?
ultimately, yeah, I would say the big thing is everybody needs population screening for cervical cancer, breast cancer, colon cancer, lung cancer for some people, whether or not they have a family history.
And prostate cancer as well at that right age for men, because those PSA tests are so incredibly important in detecting prostate cancer, right?
Yes.
If any of the negligent male internists care to...
Or if the men care to go to the doctor.
When I go to the doctor, I walk in, my guy just goes, "Sup, you good?" I go, "Dog, I'm good." And then we fist bump and I leave. And that's it. And then I come back and see him 4 years later. He goes, "Oh my God, your cholesterol is insane." And I was like, I thought you said I was good.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
We actually men just fist bump, chug beer, and drink and talk about sports.
Did I ever tell you about the time I was on a shoot and we took a break to get lunch? I was like, oh, there's this Jewish deli nearby that's supposed to be really good. And just get like a fat pastrami sandwich. And I get a call and they're like, "Hey, this is Nancy from your doctor's office. You did miss your 3-week blood draw for like the 8th time in a row." They had to call me every time. And I was like, "Oh, we'll be right there." And like went in there. I went and gave blood. They called me back the next day and they were like, "You've got to come back. You've got to come back. Your blood looks insane." Like, I don't know. I think I had au jus in my blood when I went. And they were so concerned. I was like, "I'm sorry. I literally just like downed a sandwich and then went and gave blood."
And you perfectly mimicked how we would say you talked when you go, "Oh, yeah, I forgot. Oh, it's time to go to the doctor."
Yeah.
Maybe we should talk to men that way and go, "Listen, dudes, go to the doctor." And get your... No, I'm kidding. Listen. I love my husband. I care about Patrick. We're not dogging you guys. We're just telling everyone who's listening, be proactive. Do what you can. There's so much prevention out there, so many opportunities to learn more about how to take care of yourself with prevention, and great doctors like Dr. Cyr, who I can honestly tell you made me feel so much better about, I'm not even worried about breast cancer or any diagnosis, because I know I'm going to be looked at so many times, and that if I am, it'll be early enough that I really feel like it'll be something that I can handle, because I will be able to say I've done everything that I can.
Good. I'm glad you feel that way.
So we thank you again, Dr. Cyr, for being here. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I don't think so. Thank you very much for having me and for bringing up this important topic. Again, the more people that know they can get this information, the better.
Yeah, for every person that's going to listen to this episode, it's one less person you'll have to sidle up next to at a party and go, "I'm sorry, but you're going to have to go get looked at."
You're welcome, Dr. Cyr.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to This is Cancer, brought to you in partnership with Siteman Cancer Center at Barnes Jewish Hospital and Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis, national leaders in cancer.
For more information on Siteman Cancer Center, go to siteman.wustl.edu and be sure to leave us a review and like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.